Trump's now moving closer to a major war with Iran, and you have sources telling Axios it could come in weeks, maybe days. You have Iran saying good progress was made in nuclear talks, though J.D. Vance says that military options aren't off the table, and an unnamed Trump advisor said there is a 90% chance that we see kinetic action in the next few weeks. And of course, all of this is coming from and involving a man who campaigned as anti-war.
I'm not going to start a war. I'm going to stop wars.
One of the reasons I was the only president in generations who didn't start a war is that I was the only president who rejected the catastrophic advice of many of Washington's generals, bureaucrats, and the so-called diplomats who only know how to get us into conflict, but they don't know how to get us out. Take a look at the globalist warmonger donors backing our opponents. That's because they're candidates of war. I am the president who delivers peace, and it's peace through strength. The war in Ukraine, I will stop the chaos in the Middle East, and I will prevent World War III from happening.
Right, according to Axios, the military operation that sources described would likely be a massive weeks-long campaign that would look more like a full-fledged war than last month's pinpoint operation in Venezuela. They also added that the military operation would likely be a joint campaign between the U.S. and Israel that would be, quote, much broader in scope and more existential for the regime than the 12-day war last June when the U.S. and Israel launched deadly strikes targeting Iran's nuclear facilities, ballistic missile sites, and personnel. And these latest developments, they come after weeks of mounting tensions. Back in January, Trump came close to launching strikes on Iran amid the regime's brutal, deadly crackdown on widespread protests. But what you had was Trump eventually backing down after Iranian authorities said that they canceled hundreds of executions, with Israel and several Arab nations asking them to hold off. And so instead, you had Trump taking a two-pronged approach: engage in military talks with Iran while building up a massive military presence in the region and repeatedly threatening Iran with military action if negotiations fail. And since last month, Trump's been amassing what he has called a massive armada, which reportedly has grown to include 2 aircraft carriers, a dozen warships, hundreds of fighter jets, and multiple air defense systems. Where the U.S. has steadily been increasing firepower in the region, even as nuclear talks have continued. And as far as the negotiations, on February 6th, you had the U.S. and Iran holding indirect negotiations in Oman. You had both sides leaving, saying things had gone well and more talks would be scheduled soon. Even Trump himself said that the conversations were very good, though he also warned Iran that there would be steep consequences if they failed to make a deal. Right? And then, ahead of another round of indirect talks scheduled this week in Switzerland, you had both sides ramping up military posturing and rhetoric. You see, for a while, there was just one aircraft carrier in the region. On Friday, you had Trump confirming he was sending a second one. Then on Monday, one day before the second round of talks was set to start, Iran held live military exercises in the Strait of Hormuz, with experts arguing that the move was a show of power intended to warn the United States that if they escalate to full-blown war, Iran's prepared to disrupt a crucial shipping lane for oil and gas, which could upend energy markets globally. Satellite images have also showed Iran's been repairing and fortifying sensitive military sites that Israel and the United States have struck in the past. And so that includes missile bases, uranium enrichment sites, and one complex where experts say that Iran appears to be building what could be a high explosive containment vessel, which is critical to developing nuclear weapons. And then even as the negotiations got underway yesterday, direct military posturing has continued from both sides. The U.S. reportedly sent another 50 fighter jets to the Middle East, while Iran fired missiles towards the Strait of Hormuz, and the Ayatollah publicly threatened to sink American warships. But then also, as far as the talks themselves, it seems like the U.S. and Iran both left with slightly different understandings of how things went down. Right, on one side, Iran's foreign minister told state television that good progress has been made and the countries now have a clear path ahead, and adding, ultimately, we were able to reach broad agreement on a set of guiding principles based on which we will move forward and begin working on the text of a potential agreement. But then at the same time, you had the U.S. presenting a more toned-down version of events, with Vice President Vance telling Fox,
in some ways it went well. They agreed to meet afterwards, but in other ways it was very clear that the president has set some red lines that the Iranians are not yet willing to actually acknowledge and work through. So we're going to keep on working it, but of course the president reserves the ability to say when he thinks that diplomacy has reached its natural end. We hope we don't get to that point, but if we do, that'll be the president's call.
Now with that, both experts and people close to Trump have raised concerns that he's really not negotiating in good faith and he fully intends to launch a major military operation. And looking into this, there are a number of reasons to think that. First up, this is literally something we've seen Trump do before. He says he wants diplomacy and then he turns around and launches strikes. Or when Israel initially launched major strikes against Iran this summer, Trump said he was committed to a diplomatic resolution on the Iran nuclear issue. And then boom, 10 days later, he authorized strikes on 3 Iranian facilities. But then beyond that, there's reason to believe that Trump's using the negotiations as a smokescreen to stall for time so that the U.S. can enhance its capabilities in the region. And many have speculated that one of the main reasons that Trump backed down from his initial threats to strike Iran last month was because the U.S. just didn't have the firepower in the region to launch a large-scale attack while still protecting American forces and allies. But now, the situation, and more importantly, where things are and their capabilities, it's different. And actually, given the military buildup we've seen from Trump, as well as his repeated threats against Iran if the talks fail, you have places like Axios arguing that it's going to be hard for him to back down without some serious concessions from Iran on its nuclear program. But then also with that, it seems almost impossible that Trump would actually get the concessions that he believes are big enough. And so if Axios is to be believed, that this full-blown military operation could come very, very soon. Or with him quoting an unnamed Trump advisor who said, the boss is getting fed up. Some people around him warn him against going to war with Iran, but I think there is 90% chance we see kinetic action in the next few weeks. And while that was also echoed by Senator Lindsey Graham, who said that strikes could be weeks away, some sources have speculated it could be even sooner. Or two Israeli officials told Axios that the Israeli government's preparing for a scenario of war within a matter of days. And if and when this happens, I agree with Axios, who said this could be the most consequential U.S. military intervention in the Middle East in at least a decade.